Kaplan. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being back. It's the third time now.
Yep, we have quite a history.
Yeah, I mean, how was your New Year's actually?
It was pretty good, like went to Manhattan and then did some bar hopping, hanged out with friends and things like that, and then came back. Now work has started again, so
Yeah, I
unfortunately
mean,
it ended for me. How about yours?
so I'm in Vegas, and it was pretty crazy. I didn't get down to the Strip, but I did go to the Sphere, watch a show there, and then the next day it was weird because there was an explosion, and I was having lunch across the street around 11ish, and I did not find out about that explosion until I was already walking towards the car because I had parked at the Wynn, which is like across the street from that, and then I was having lunch at Maggiano's, which is this Italian restaurant, which is literally across the street, and everything was calm, which is kind of weird because just a couple hours earlier, because I was there like around 11, a couple hours earlier, a guy had shot himself and exploded in the Cybertruck, and I did not know anything about that until I was out of there.
Yeah, someone decided to set up the fireworks inside his Cybertruck in front of the Trump Tower.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, because we had this in Vegas. There was that New Orleans incident. Um, I mean, I guess we're getting off to a weird start this year, but hopefully the rest of the year is much better than what we've been seeing. But I guess we're going to get into some. Well, I wanted to talk to you about a topic that is not very happy, I guess, and that is Internet of Things. And we talked about this briefly last time we spoke. The Internet of Things. So I just wanted to continue that conversation. And something that I have thought about, well, just thinking about the entire thing is, we're entering into the era of AI, and now we have devices in every house. And this year we might actually have way more devices in every household. And those devices are connected to the internet. And it just takes a bad actor to access your information and do whatever they like with it. And there's just so much that we could do to safeguard our environment. But I mean, it's scary. I just wanted to get your thoughts before we, begin and delving more into this topic.
Yeah, especially with the new IoT devices popping up in our homes and stuff. Usually they're operated by third parties, right? Like companies, which are unfortunately known to have data leaks and things like that. So with IoT devices, like if you, let's say, have a something like a smartwatch or thing like that, that's monitoring your health or those kind of things, and it's being stored in a small company, especially small companies are targets for attackers. If there's a data leak, like unfortunately there isn't much you can do about that. However, there are still good practices for privacy things such as end-to-end encryption, right? Using that for your data storage. For instance, there are hosts like that. For instance, Proton Mail, what I'm using. That one provides end-to-end encrypted emails. No one, even they can't read it, to the best of my knowledge. Now they launched Proton Cloud. Cloud is also a good one. There's a couple of other cloud service providers that provide end-to-end service. I believe Google uses REST, encryption at rest, and encryption at transit. So technically, like, yeah, it's like an attacker will have a hard time accessing your data, but if Google wants to, they can read it as well. And one thing that can force Google to read it is a subpoena from a court, right? And I've also heard that sometimes the government corruption can be an issue, especially on investigations and things like that. And subpoenas can be distributed a little bit too easily, right? So protecting your data from attackers and government is getting harder and harder, but we still have to kind of cling on our best practices.
Uh, no, definitely. And just recently, it goes from not only safeguarding from yourself from the services that you use, but also being able to safeguard yourself through your wireless router. And there's the devices, there's the services that you use. If your wireless is being shared with other people, their activity, and the router itself. So recently, it was noted that TP-Link, which is like a router that is widely used, comes from China. And this
I didn't
was
know that.
yeah, so this was one of the things that I didn't really care about. I mean, as much as I should have, because I thought that what would they be able to get from me? It's not like I'm a government official or anything. But I had a a former KGB agent on, and he talked to me about his mission when he came from Germany over to the US, and what he intended to do, which was it was like a small task he was given, but it was to get information on how society, like how American society reacts to certain news that happen. So there's that, and there's TikTok, and and I guess this thing is shared across all people. Like they're not worried about the Chinese government infiltrating them, because it's not like everyone's a government official, and what information can they actually get from anyone. But it's mostly how people react to certain events, and how they respond to it, and how they're able to be manipulated to think a certain way. So I guess that's the biggest danger that we are facing, that the information that we're seeing, uh, if there are any bad actors that have an agenda to make us think a certain way. And it goes back to IoT. Now they have access, or they could get access to your household and your behaviors, and that's pretty scary.
Yeah, especially when it comes down to targeted attacks, like against key government officials or things like that. I believe there was one case like that in Middle East where one particular country made an order to what do you call made an order to a certain company to manufacture pinger devices, right? Like when someone beeps you and things like that. And I believe the government, that's like a little bit more, I believe, on the political side, but it does like have some overlaps on the IoT side, right?
Hmm.
Because now you have to care about who manufactured that device. And then I believe some of the devices were embedded with a bomb that the attacker country used that to kind of like target certain key people, right? And things like that. So that's like one example on how the manufacturer can influence, right, the privacy or the safety of the customers,
Right.
right? And this is TP Link is probably relates to this environment.
So I believe what had happened was Hezbollah was targeted, and they targeted them by pagers. So the manufacturer of pagers, there was a middleman. I'm not sure, but it just makes sense. There was someone in the middle that intercepted that and gave them pagers that exploded on command, and it took out a huge number of Hezbollah members, and that's pretty scary. That we are um, entering into an era that someone could target you and they don't have to come and shoot you. They could do it through the internet or through sending you a device. And, it's happened with a Unabomber. But these attackers are getting much more clever in the way that they target these attacks.
That is very true. And I believe, like, in terms of these kind of attacks, 95% of the population should probably have no reason to worry, right? Because these extreme, like, levels of attacks are probably more towards the 5% of the population that hold key positions. But still, like, for that 95% of the population, they still get affected by certain things, right? Such as health data has always been a controversial thing because insurances can use that to discriminate, right? DNA
Mhm.
data or things like that. That's a little bit off the IoT domain, but DNA data has been very, what do you call, especially 23andMe. People have been careful about that. And I believe they were kind of going bankrupt or something like that. And then another company is going to purchase that, and people were kind of unsure of
Mhm.
their privacy practices, right? Because it holds like most people's DNA. It can infer who's, what do you call, whose family members are who, and things like that. So it is very scary in that regards. What do you think about it?
So, I mean, with 23andMe, I think they were losing a lot of money. Their stock price is down incredibly, and I think it's just poor management. But it's scary that people's data is just everywhere now. If you go on Google, they track everything they have on you. All the websites that you've logged into with Google, they have all that information, and you don't think about
The
it much.
the biggest problem is they still provide, usually the ones that are the biggest tracker are usually the ones that provide the best service. Like, at least for me, like when I use Google versus something more privacy oriented like DuckDuckGo, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I get what I want on Google in a much shorter time span compared to DuckDuckGo. So it's literally, we don't have much choice. We either have to sacrifice efficiency or we have to sacrifice privacy.
And now, even with ChatGPT, they have all that information. And they have more complex information because if you're using it for your work, now they have numbers if you put your numbers in.
That is very true. Like, especially like ChatGPT is getting more and more prevalent. And honestly, I think based on what I'm hearing in my friend group and things like that, people are dumping information there left and right, like even from their chat groups, just to summarize what happened in their chats and things like that. And
Wow.
we don't know what OpenAI is doing. And theoretically, they can gather all that data and then make it a corpus and then train the AI on it. And I have seen some other papers on how to, what you call, subvert machine learning models to gain the training data from it, right? Like, and when I was doing some development, also getting help from ChatGPT, I realized that even ChatGPT is leaking some of the internal libraries that it's using. I forgot the
Wow.
library's name. I kind of like used ChatGPT and it gave me a specific library and I put it into my VS Code. I was like, hey, I've never heard this library. Let me just also pip install it, download it, right? And then when I download it, it's not on the internet, right? And I'm like, what's going on? Let me just
Hmm.
Google the library. And when I Google it, I see tons of forums talking about how people are suspecting that this is an internal library and this is just leaking outside of ChatGPT.
Yeah, because now you're able to upload photos and you're able to upload files, and who knows how many more things you're going to be able to upload. But now you're just not copying and pasting data. You're uploading files, and ChatGPT is able to get all of those files, and they're explicit in what they do with that. They use it for their training.
Training.
So
And
is
I would also bet that they would also have a leg in the government departments, like for, what do you call, sometimes like when government has like watch lists and stuff like that and tracking people, right? I would not be surprised if OpenAI is kind of collaborating with government on that area as well, on certain accounts.
Yeah, because they warn, at least the government warns. They warn you of using TikTok and how China runs TikTok, but our government's doing the same exact thing with Facebook and everything it owns. And at least now with Twitter, I hope that Elon Musk is being responsible in safeguarding, I guess, X now from government interference. But that's just like one slice of the pie. And
I've always been a little bit scared of private companies because their transparency is a little bit less compared to public companies, right? Like Twitter
yeah.
used to be a public, and then all their financial information and most information got online, right? They had earning calls and things like that. The CEO usually gave a huge account on what's going on in the company. Now we don't have that. So if things kind of go south there, like we're not sure if it's going to get leaked to us or not.
And another interesting thing that I don't think anyone has really talked about is Truth Social being owned by Trump. So if anyone gets kicked out of that platform, would it be a violation of the First Amendment since Trump is going to be a government official pretty soon? He's going to be an elected official, he's going to be the president. And even though he may put Truth Social in a, I forgot what it's called, but giving the responsibility to like a third party of operating the platform. He's he is still the owner of it. So if anyone gets kicked out of that platform, which I haven't heard anyone really getting kicked out since he wants to make it about free speech and all. But if no one breaks the law and they get their account deactivated, will that be a violation of the First Amendment?
Yeah, that's been a longly debated area, I think, especially in law and constitutional law. I heard from a friend of mine who's also studying law that constitutional law is the hardest like area to kind of like study, because
Mhm.
things are very generic, like you have your freedom of speech, but the question is how like convenient the freedom of speech has to be, like for the other people, right? Like, can I just interrupt an event and then just use my freedom of speech there? What's the amount of interruption, reasonable interruption I can do? So those kind of like things are really ongoing when you give like freedom of speech. It's going to be a
Yeah.
huge boundary.
I mean, that's the entire reason that we even have a Supreme Court to interpret the Constitution.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're getting a little bit off topic, but taking it back to security measures. I know we briefly talked about this, but what can people actually do? Because it just seems that we have no choice in using the internet now. And in order to get on the internet, we need to go through a matter of servers. And who is managing all those servers, the networks, the devices that we're using? Like, who knows what other third party is gaining access to the same network that we're on? Because we've seen it that if you stay at a hotel, that's a shared network, or if you're in the Starbucks, that's a shared network. So if someone else is on that in that network, they could actually access your device. And if you use your bank account information, they are able to extract that from your device and mirror like a good party, I should say, someone with good intentions, but then they have all this information on you. and you have like little recourse to for that. Like, what can we do to safeguard ourselves?
Yeah, usually there's a whole different area when you're using public networks like airport networks or Starbucks networks, right?
Yeah.
There is a couple of other protections that you can take in those areas. And for the public one, there is like a list of things that I can probably pull up. Uh, what do you go? What should I do? Let me actually kind of just find it. I kind of have to access my notes for that. I had like a list of the things I do, especially to what do you call whenever I'm logging into Starbucks or things like that to ensure
Hmm.
protection. But
Yeah.
one thing that's advised is usually don't try to log into your sensitive information like bank accounts, right? Or don't use your social security or things like that because there is a high chance of middleman attacks, right? Someone can, for instance, create a fake router, right? There's a lot of demonstration of that on the internet.
Yeah.
But what are the things you do as well, personally?
So if I'm in a public network, I mean, I don't really do too much sensitive or sensitive behaviors, in my device, but I may have. Um, I don't consciously do it, but it may just happen that I think, I need to do this real quick, and I'm on a public network. So it may
One
happen.
thing is Yeah, one thing that we can actually use in private networks, sorry, public networks, is a VPN that also helps even in private networks, right? Because
Yeah.
let's say you're using a private network, right? The VPN can protect you from your ISP looking at your data. I believe by law they were required to keep your internet data
Yeah.
for a certain amount of months or years, something like that. However, the VPN can help you in public and private networks, right?
Hmm.
And one thing, of course, is the HTTPS as well. You have to check for if you're like connecting to HTTPS websites, because let's say if you're not, right? For instance, then you're sending data in plain text.
Yeah.
And the problem about that is like, um, while along the way, right, like let's say you send the data, the HTTP plain text,
Yeah.
right, there's a smaller, in my opinion, there's a smaller chance that an attacker is going to get that data from like the path that it takes to the server to reach the server compared to like in the same network, right? Like if I
Right.
use a sniffer, you're going to use wireless. If I use a wireless sniffer or something like that, you can kind of get that HTTP information, especially if you're targeting one person. It can be very helpful to that, but in terms of like listening on routers, plain text data,
Yeah.
it's gonna be, even if it's plain text, it's gonna be hard to make sense and interpret that data compared to an attacker doing that in a public network. Another like area what you can do is definitely turn off file sharing. That's
Hmm.
I think it can be automatic in some devices, and obviously also keep your software updated, and also monitor your network connectivity, like see if there's any unusual activity when you're connected to the network, like make sure you're not connected to networks that you don't know. You can confirm your network with the clerk, the cashier, to ensure you're connecting to the correct network. And if you see more than one networks with the same name, you can be a little bit cautious about that as the cashier or things like that.
Hmm. No, definitely. So, um, I mean, that's only one thing, but like going to Starbucks, it just seems that anyone could just sit there and make a network that and name it as Starbucks free Wi-Fi, and a lot of people go to Starbucks to do work. So some may not realize that they're actually gaining or getting their Wi-Fi from a third party that is not even Starbucks. It's just someone sitting there with their own network, and now they're gaining into your device. So they're gaining access into your device.
Yeah, and the biggest problem is that although I recommended you to ask the cashier, right?
Yeah.
In this case, even the cashier can be an attacker and set up a fake wireless access point, right? And then ask you to connect there and just read all the data that you're sending. So that's also one possibility, although you can ask the cashier, right? I believe it's called insider attacks.
Hmm.
The insider kind of facilitates it. So like there isn't in the public network, it's a little bit too dangerous there, right? But a
Yeah.
VPN can help. VPN does encrypt your data. When your data is encrypted, it will be harder for someone to read it. They can still sniff it and they can still see it, but
Mhm.
it will be a little bit more challenging for them to read what's going on actually in that data.
And funny that you say that. The cashier could be the attacker. And I don't want to trash Starbucks, but I mean, there was an incident of a Starbucks. I want to say that it was a Starbucks employee that got a customer's card information, and she went shopping with that information, and the customer came back and confronted her, and the employee just said, "Oh, I'm sorry." So a bad actor could be an employee of the establishment and be able to gain access to just everyone's information, and the customers may not even know it.
And that's really common as well. You know, like for instance, back before 2020, if you remember the Capital One AWS incident, right?
Yeah.
The incident was mostly caused by an insider at AWS, which is kind of interesting, ironic as well, because he actually didn't use any internal, what do you call, tools to gain access to that, right? He just scanned
Uh-huh.
all the AWS servers that have misconfigurations, and he found out that Capital One has it. And at the end, he got arrested. But still, like insiders who know the system the best, it will be much easier for them to find an exploitation. So I'd be a little bit more cautious against insiders than outsiders a bit.
So, and then going back to IoT, how likely is it for a bad actor to gain access to your home? Uh, now we are seeing smart doorknobs, right? So you have the front door that is all connected to the internet. So you're able to open your front door through your phone. So if someone gains access to your network, they're able to do the same thing. But how likely is that to happen?
I would say it depends heavily on the location, right? Let's say I live in the house, right? And then I'm
Hmm.
a roommate there, and then there's the homeowner also living there, right? I
Yeah.
have access to their router. So I'm gonna have access, I'm gonna know the Wi-Fi password, and most likely that homeowner is not gonna know what the admin password of that router is, right? The admin password is different than the router password.
Right.
The admin password allows you to log into the router itself, right? And things like
Hmm.
that. So having access to that router can make a very big difference. And you don't even have to be a tenant. If you're just a guest as well, what you can do is usually the Wi-Fi password is written along with the admin password on the router, right? And a lot of
Uh-huh.
people unfortunately use the default password. They don't change their password,
Yeah.
right? So that is one big issue. And uh, you can also hard reset the router. Let's say even the passwords are changed, you can hard reset the router by pressing on the reset button for, I believe, like something like 10 seconds. And then that will reset everything back to the default passwords, which you can also get it from the internet, right? So
Hmm.
the router is technically your network, right? So if you gain access to the router, your attack surfaces increases a lot, right? So, but what do you call? Does that make you a little bit scared?
I mean, if someone breaks into your house and gets access to your router, it could be an issue, right?
Yeah, especially if they know your Wi-Fi password as well. Because imagine they hard reset it, they turn your Wi-Fi password into the old password, but they change the admin password. And to be honest, like how many of us does log into our routers? You know, like logging into the router is much different than connecting to the router through the internet, right?
Hmm.
The router gives you access to all the settings and things like that, rules and seeing which devices connect, what their MAC addresses are. I mean, I heard some routers even allow you to read like the browsing history and things like that. So it does get a little bit too creepy. But I would say the answer to your question is depends on how like location access, like uh, how much close they can get to your Wi-Fi, like in terms of physical, right? But even without the physical, there are a lot of attack surfaces. For instance, there was this one paper that examines the security features of cars, right? And they found a
Hmm.
lot of what do you call attack surfaces, such as the OBD port, right? And then the Bluetooth, the keypad, the key cards, like when you press on the button, it can unlock and lock the car. They found some attack surfaces there. They found attack surfaces on GPS because GPS doesn't use encryption, right? I believe
Right.
it's the military version of the GPS that uses encryption. So in
Hmm.
the attack, but I believe there will be a lot of attack surfaces in a home network as well, especially in a smart home network.
I
Do
mean,
you?
what were you gonna say?
Oh, actually, I forgot it. Go for it.
um, so it's no, it's something that's definitely people should watch out for because everyone's. I mean, I would think that everyone's house is connected to the internet, and I guess there's a couple of houses without internet connection. But for the most part, everyone has access to the internet. And you know this because if someone has cameras on the outside of their house, they have uh, they have a network for sure because they need something to be connected to. So most people now have a network connection, and through that network connection, all of their devices are connected to that network. But there are some safeguards at least. And I know this is going to get even better now, but also bad actors are going to be get even more clever because, when passwords first became a thing, they were very easy to crack, right?
Yeah, and then they implemented multi-factor authentication to kind
Yeah.
of like help with the situation, but just like it all comes back to the efficiency versus privacy like
Mhm.
balance, right? Like for instance, you can use a VPN, but it's gonna slow your connection down a certain amount, right? And it can
Mhm.
cause frustration, things like that. Or you can avoid using Google, which you're gonna miss out on the time like gain you can get from like better search features and things like
Mhm.
that. So in my opinion, it's all like an efficiency. But honestly, I think people lean more towards convenience, efficiency versus
Mhm.
convenience. Like for instance, me, like I do have I would say in terms of passwords, like I'm a little bit more careful. But still, like if you're using like hundreds of accounts, different accounts, banking accounts, entertainment accounts, people are usually more inclined to use just one password for all of it, which is like absolutely dangerous.
Yeah.
But what do you think about that?
I mean, like I know people use complex passwords, but some people also use very simple passwords. So it's very important to use something complex, and there are password managers to keep track of all this. And I've worked in companies that we were given work laptop and or even your email that you use at work, and like every 3 months you're requested to change your password, and it was pretty annoying, but I get it. These companies, they share a lot of sensitive information, and they need to protect that data. so
Yeah,
so it's critical that these companies safeguard everything and take the measures needed to protect all of the work information.
yeah. The problem with that also is like usually a big company has many more resources compared to a small company, right? And then
Yeah.
I was recently writing a paper on like that's related to big companies versus small companies and their interaction with the cloud. And honestly, I believe the 55, 50, almost half of the GDP for the US comes from small companies, and the other half comes from like big companies. That's one of my citation sources. I believe
Uh-huh.
this was something like 2018. I don't know what it is now, but it's probably small businesses are also a bigger, what do you call, small businesses still probably have a significant portion of the
Hmm.
GDP, like basically manufacturing more devices. And the problem with that is since they don't have as much resource as big companies, they usually don't like they usually prioritize only functional requirements for their
Right.
product, just getting the product working, right? So security isn't usually the first and the most important feature for them, right? So there are some like problems that's related to logistics there and kind of what we call mother nature, right? Like
Hmm.
unfortunately we can't connect it if it's a small company
Right.
administering that device, right? Like there can be a little bit more risk there.
Hmm.
But one way you can avoid it is also checking the reputation of the company, how old the
Hmm.
company is, if it's more established, and then you can decide to buy their product so that you can make sure that they're using proper encryption and things like that. Because usually with these kind of things, companies like they don't make the source code available, so you don't know what's going on in the public, right? And things
Yeah.
like that. So it is a little bit scary. Do you check if it's do you kind of like look into the company that's behind the product before you buy something?
Not really. I mean, I don't think at all. Just sometimes when it's something relatively new to me that I haven't really heard much about. So, as far as that goes, I just check for the product itself, not necessarily the company. Because I know that a lot of these products come from China. So that, I
Yeah.
guess that's a problem. And, the funny thing about the big versus small companies is that smaller companies are going to start being able to use AI to become more efficient, which is also a risk in itself. And smaller companies may not have the safeguards available to defend themselves against bad or against attacks.
That is very true. Usually, attackers, especially like ransomware attackers, I heard at the time, like a decade ago, that they try to target small companies, especially small healthcare companies or companies that hold very sensitive data.
Hmm.
And since they don't have the safeguards, like they can fall as victims more compared to like big companies, right? So
Hmm.
it is like unfortunately an act of mother nature, but it's like how do you solve this problem, like how do you ensure that small companies, one way can probably be something like standardization, right?
Right.
For instance, in the IoT space you have platforms like, I'm not very familiar with smart things and I don't know if you heard it about it as well. I just recently heard about it. I believe it's a platform to what do you call centralized control to all the IoT devices that's inside the house,
Hmm.
right? And since there's some standardization there, right, you can easily, it's owned by Samsung. They
Hmm.
can encrypt, they can integrate encryption there and require all the client devices to use encryption, right? So even if a
Yeah.
small company is building an IoT device, the
Hmm.
client can look if it's compatible with something like smart things. And then if it is, that can be an automatic green flag, right? And that can be a little bit more independent from if it's a small company or if it's a big company. But standardization also like emerges a little bit slowly in my opinion, so
Hmm.
it
I
is
mean,
still an
yeah.
open.
Yeah, and we know that Samsung is a South Korean companies, and now a big problem is also that a lot of our TVs are becoming, or they're at this point they're all smart. They all have access to the internet. All the TVs are coming out, and a lot of those TVs are also manufactured in China. So it's something that we can't really get away from. And um, when we point out a company, it's basically all politics because we know most of the stuff that we consume is coming from China. So it's really hard to get away from that. And we use China as a trade partner because it's just cheaper to make our products there. Our phones are being made in China. So when we just point out certain companies and say that they're being manufactured in China and so forth. I just want to say that it's all politics because the risk is never really going to get away if if our products are all coming from the same place, you know.
That is very true. The fact that like the country that the device is being manufactured in has doesn't have the best reputation
Hmm.
with like anti-corruption or things like that kind of concerns me a little bit, you know, like not that the US is the best as well, you know, like
Right.
not a lot of company has a great reputation with anti-corruption and integrity, but
Hmm.
still like it can influence on the safety of these devices and like why it's like, for instance, right, like in China it's a little bit authoritarian, it's up to the Communist Party, right? In North Korea it's up to Kim Jong-un, so technically if you're manufacturing like a IoT there, and if Kim Jong-un doesn't like you, right, like he can ask the company to put like the what do you call the bomb like they did in the pingers, right, the
Hmm.
pinger incident that we told,
Yeah.
and then the company has to comply, right? Because it's only up to one person, right?
Hmm.
So, but the fact that the U.S. there's democracy, right? The procedure for that, like let's say the president doesn't like you, I bet like the process will be much harder compared to the North Korean process, right?
Yeah.
Or if it's even possible, right? I don't think it will be worth it, but if it's even possible, but still, like those kind of things question me, you know, like if China
Hmm.
was a little bit more democracy, it will probably subside my concerns just a little
Yeah.
bit. But still, I don't think they have the best reputation with integrity, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, definitely not. Um, but you know, where can people look more into your research papers?
Oh, they're all on Google Scholars. If you just type my first name and last name on Google, or if you type my first and last name on Google Scholars, you will see my name there. And then right now, since we talked, I believe I published two papers on
Hmm.
preprint. Oh, they're not published yet. They're just on preprint. Let me
Hmm.
rephrase that. One is about global ping, which
Hmm.
is basically a system for people to run network diagnostics from anywhere in the world. It's
Hmm.
community driven. And the other one is Pyro Guardian, which is a platform for firefighter wearables and things like that. So that one's
Huh.
like heavily IoT as well.
Wow. Wow. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things yet to come. But so far, this has been a really interesting conversation, and I'm glad that we really got into the IoT space and talked about the risk. And you know, there are several benefits as well, but we need to keep in mind that we are being we are becoming interconnected, and all of our devices are sharing networks, and we just don't know where we go from here because now it'll just be weird not being online or being connected uh, to the internet. Uh, but now it's like we don't have really any privacy at all, and it's just going to be something that we're going to need to get used to.
Yeah, especially with mobile devices like phones, right?
Hmm.
Due to factors such as the carrier, right, which is out of your control, and you absolutely need a carrier in the US right now.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, like we have very limited privacy on the PC. You can still fight about it, but I view mobile as a little bit of lost cause.
Yeah, I know, I know. It's a lot of stuff is yet to come out, but all we could really do is just sit and watch what happens and just hope for the best. But you know, again, it's been an interesting conversation, and listen, what you are doing is pretty incredible, and getting into the research of it, and you know, putting out certain flaws and what we could do for that. You know, it's great. But thank you for coming on the podcast and discussing this with me.
Of course, and thanks for having me, Eric.
Well,
It was a pleasure.
thank you very much. I mean, the pleasure is all mine, and you know, when as you continue to release these papers, I'm happy to have you come on and discuss the new research findings. But thank you so much.
Sounds good. I would love to. Take care.
All right, you as well. Thank you.